Good morning and welcome to the Well Steps webinar. We have long been anticipating this webinar. There are over 650 people who registered for the webinar, and so we think that a lot of you have been looking forward to it too. It is my pleasure today to introduce Dr. Steven Aldana, my business partner, my longtime friend. Most of you don't know this about Steve, but he wrote a dissertation on the return on investment, one of the first papers published in this field. He was practically weaned on this science. He knows this better than anyone that I know. There's absolutely no question about it. He is well known for publishing the definitive review on the ROI of wellness programs, which was published in the American Journal of Health Promotion. We've listed that on with the webinar materials for this webinar today. Steve is showing the new Well Steps webpage, and so he's going to show you how to get the slides and any other materials we talk about today. Just scroll down on our page, go to the Wellness Webinar button, and then you'll find it right there. Review of financial returns and some other stuff. There are their slides and etc. So we invite you to get the slides for this presentation. Many of you will be emailing or asking questions during the webinar, wanting to know where you can get them. That's where you get them. A couple of things you may not know about Steve. He's a proud grandpa. His grandkids are frequently over at his house. It is a jolly get together whenever you're there. There's kids and grandkids and all kinds of people over there visiting. He is one of the most avid bike riders I know, and he has an unblemished track record. He has never once wiped out on his bike. And I have ridden bikes with Steve, and so I find that very unbelievable because the first or second time I rode with him, I nearly wiped out. And he also is learning to play the ukulele. So stuff you didn't know about Steve, but now you do. We'd like to just thank Ryan Isaacson and other members of our team. Ryan Isaacson is on the back end. He will be manning questions for you. We'll be taking questions at the end of the webinar. All phones have been muted so that we can have a better webinar experience today. So you won't be able to verbally ask questions, but you can type them in on the GoToWebinar control panel, which should appear on the right side of your computer screen, and then we'll get to the questions at the end of the webinar. We'll save plenty of time for that. Again, the slides are available on our website. Just go to wellsteps.com, scroll down till you see the webinar circle, and click on that. You'll be able to find the webinar slides. With that, it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Steven Aldana, who's going to present the webinar today. Steve?
Thanks, Troy. I always mention when we do the webinars how honored I am that you will take some time to join us. We've had about 900 people click the link and almost 700 people register. So we know this is a hot topic, and I'm excited to do this because this is kind of my wheelhouse. It's been about 25 years since I did my dissertation. One of the very first times we really looked hard at an actuarial setting about what the return on investment is for wellness. And I'm excited to do this because I've been doing these studies since then. If there was an area of expertise that I feel particularly proud of and particularly adept at doing, this is the space. It's what I taught for years in academia. These are the research papers I've done. So I'm excited to help you answer really this question, and that is, are wellness programs a worthy investment? That's really the question. When we talk about ROI, when we talk about return on value, we're really asking the question, is this a wise place for my organization to spend some money? Will we get money back? Will this become a core business strategy, or will this be just kind of a flash in the pan? Is it worth my board's time, my time, our company's time and money? Because there is an investment required here. And is there a return? And how do we know that there's a return on that investment? That's what really the big question is. And everybody who has a wellness program asks the same question. The reason we're having this discussion today is because for about 20 years, we've pretty much had a free pass in the wellness world on discussing the pros and cons of our wellness benefits and what wellness programs can do. It hasn't been until the last couple of years we've had some very extreme vocal and violent critics attack the work that's been done. And what I find interesting is, I've spent my whole life working in this space, and now all of a sudden we have a lot of other people who pop up who know that all of this is right or wrong, and they've come in with guns blazing about all of this. It's like, where were you 20 years ago when we were talking about it? So what I want to share with you today is what do we really know to be true about the return on wellness programs? What do we know to be patently and blatantly false about that? How do you know the difference between a good program and a not so good program? And really, what are some valid criticisms of what we're trying to do? We're trying to answer this very question. So what's the best way for us to give you the best knowledge to go back to leadership or to go to your broker, your consultant, and say, is wellness going to be a worthy investment for us? Well, there has been some controversy that's come out in the last few years. Most of that controversy starts with what I call outrageous claims. Outrageous claims are statements that are so beyond compare and pale that they will catch your attention. If it's a bland, simple statement, you don't care much about it. But these are headline kinds of things. Here's a couple in the last couple of years that have come out that have gotten some considerable media attention. The iPhone uses more electricity than a refrigerator. And that's true if you stretch the iPhone out over about a 10-year period. It's just a ridiculous statement that catches your attention. We've had the whole social media and social contagion with risk and health risk. And so there is this statement, fat friends make you fat, which is patently false. It's simply not true. We know there are some associations there. So we get these really off-the-wall, outrageous claims. Well, there are outrageous claims being made by the critics about the wellness industry and about what's going on. And they are completely and patently false and outrageous. To help us understand these critics, I've turned to my good friend, Anton Ego. You remember the movie Ratatouille? Anton was the food critic. So Anton is our surrogate for our wellness critics. Yes, every single wellness outcome which has been made public is made up. That's a patently false, broad statement that the critics now promote with much gusto. Another one of my favorites. 90% of wellness programs being sold to companies are counterproductive at worst and worthless at best. So these are some catch-all, I'm going to throw out the kitchen sink and everything with it because all of this stuff is a completely made up garbage. So the first time I heard these quotes, I scratched my head and my first thought was, why would somebody say this? What would make them make those statements? And have they not read any of the literature or made up any of the information or ever published a paper in their lives about this? I've spent most of my career doing research and publishing papers on these wellness programs. And for someone to come out and say every single wellness outcome which has been made public is made up is just patently false. And I have a lot of other words to describe this. Some of them have to do with the digestive processes of cattle. But my point is, it's just garbage. It's just pure, unadulterated garbage. The problem is some people don't know the difference between garbage and fact, or fact and fiction. This has created some confusion in the market with some people. Those of us who've been in the wellness industry for our lifetime are appalled at the blatant nature of the patent lies about what we do. And we're appalled that people would not even look at the data carefully to see what we really do know. So when we talk about the return on wellness, I've listed a few things here that are known to be valuable components of the benefits of wellness. And there's a variety of them. What is the return of wellness? Well, it impacts a variety of these things. It impacts the medical cost spend for a company. These wellness programs can impact presenteeism and absenteeism. They can impact the prevalence and severity of workers' comp claims. They impact employee safety. There's long-term, short-term disability that are impacted by employee health. They have a dramatic impact on employee morale, and they can also be used for recruitment and retention. And so if you look at the entire scope, and this is not the full list, if you look at the entire scope, what we're really looking at is not just the wellness program itself, but we're looking at managing population health. When we manage the health and well-being of our employees, it affects each of these variables in this model. It touches these in some way. I can remember several years ago being at Microsoft and talking to their HR director, getting the tour of their wellness facility. They have one of the most extensive wellness programs and fitness centers I have ever seen at a corporation in my life, ever. It has few comparisons on the planet. There's no out-of-pocket expense for healthcare. There's zero copay, zero deductible. They have an amazing array of benefits. And the fitness facilities that they have were truly, truly world-class. They are used almost exclusively for retention and recruitment because they're competing with Google and everybody else for employees. They want to make sure there's a rich benefits package there. So their wellness, fitness, population health management efforts, their executive physicals, everything that they do is really focused on recruitment and retention. Now that's unrealistic for the rest of the world. We don't have those kinds of incomes and salaries and profit margins to be able to work, but they do. So they do it for different reasons, and you may be doing it for other reasons. In Europe or in the rest of the world where they have socialized medicine, they don't care so much about the medical cost side. They're really interested in presenteeism, productivity, safety, morale. They do wellness for a lot of other reasons besides healthcare costs. So when we look at the value of wellness and which of these is really meaningfully impacted by wellness, we have to ask ourselves, what evidence do we have to support this? If you're going to make a decision on whether or not wellness programs are worth it, if there is a return on investment, where do you get your information to make that conclusion? So this is the old standard knowledge chart. Where do we get knowledge? Well, we get it from personal experience. We can hear from peers or competitors or people that we know in the industry, our network. There are blogs and news articles and books. There's information that comes from wellness vendors. So you've got the producers of the world, the consultants and the brokers who know a little bit about this and sometimes a lot. Then you've got published science, research efforts, different types of studies that have been published looking at whether or not these programs can impact absenteeism or healthcare costs. You've got the critics who are out there lambasting the science or lambasting what they saying essentially whatever they want. And it's important to remember that everybody who is providing information, everybody on this list has an agenda, including WellSteps. WellSteps was originally designed to improve public health in a way that could be sustainable long term, which means we have to be able to make enough money to continue helping other work sites and employers improve public health. It's in our vested interest for our mission statement and for our profitability that we take a good look at this, and we have a way of approaching this. So whoever they are, I don't care what their purpose is, even the critics, everybody has an agenda. Absolutely everybody. Now, which of these would you rely upon the most? Which of these is the most unbiased and the clearest information that you can get? That would be the science. The science is the most trusted piece. A blog, say whatever you want in a blog, articles, books, nobody's going to look over your shoulder. You can say whoever, whatever, do whatever you want to do. But when we do science and we publish that science, all of a sudden the rules change. When we have a scientific paper that describes an outcome and an intervention and you used a methodology, that scientific review is looked at carefully by a set of peers. They're typically other professors, other experts in the world who are experts in that topic. They do this work for free. They review your study and they make comments. Well, did you do that? And what about this piece? And did you consider that limitation? And why didn't you not control for that piece? They're going to try to pick apart your study from a scientific perspective in an effort to make it better. They have to declare your conflict of interest when you do a paper. Do you have any conflicts? Is anybody paying you to do this? Generally, you declare your conflicts. And then you have to use scientific methodology that is valid. It means you're measuring, truly measuring what you think you're measuring. It's reliable. That thing continues to measure over time accurately, and that the entire study can be replicated by somebody else and get similar results. So, excuse me, these scientific papers are subject to careful scrutiny, and that's what sets them apart. It is the peer review process that allows other people to take a really deep dive and see what was done and to see how the study is weak, how it's strong, and it's as unbiased as we get. Sometimes they're still biased. And there is no such thing as a perfect study. Every single study ever done on anything on the planet published in any journal has some limitations. Even the best randomized clinical trials, which most people would consider to be the absolute gold standard. And you understand how this works. Groups are randomized, one group gets the intervention, the other group gets a control, and we follow them across time. So that at the end of the study, the only difference between the two groups is that one group got an intervention, the other group did not, all things being equal. That's the gold standard, and that's the way to go, if you can get there. But in most cases, especially in the business world, it is impossible or extremely difficult to ever do a randomized clinical trial. Now here's where this gets really muddy really quickly. Many people hold the randomized clinical trials as the only source of truth, light, and knowledge. In other words, if you don't have randomized clinical trials, you have no studies, you have no evidence, you have no proof. Do wellness programs work? Are they worth the investment? Well, let's take a look at the randomized clinical trials. Well, there's not a lot of them because they're extremely hard to do. So let me give you a scenario. We've done WellSteps in a variety of locations with a variety of employer groups in a variety of business sectors, so that they're all doing the same WellSteps program, but some are in Portland, Maine, some are in Illinois, some are in rural Iowa, some are working in sewage treatment plants in Nevada. These people are spread out across multiple states in multiple locations. They have nothing in common with each other than they're doing WellSteps campaigns and rewards and incentives. And then we track these people 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, and we see big improvements in health risks and improvements in elevated health risks, improvements in health behaviors. And you could ask the question, did you have a control group? No, we didn't. But we looked at multiple people in multiple locations in multiple time zones doing multiple jobs, and all of their results from these people ends up being the same. Well, you didn't do a randomized clinical trial. It's true. We did not have a control group because we couldn't find a group who agreed to do nothing for 3 years. So is that study any good? Well, you have to ask the question, what evidence what's the quality of that evidence? Well, in my book, that information across a whole bunch of different groups is just as valuable as a clinical trial. And let me give you an example. Take smoking. Take tobacco use. We know tobacco use is a problem. We know it's associated with multiple conditions, heart disease being number one, lung cancer. You get this. Do you know how many randomized clinical trials there are on humans who did and did not smoke in a control group? There are 0. There's not a single randomized clinical trial that has ever shown the ill effects of tobacco use. Not one. And the reason there's not one is because nobody wants to be assigned to the smoking group. Hey, come join our study. We'll give you some incentives and a little movie pass. You get to be assigned to the smoker group for the next 4 years. We want to see if it kills you or not. Nobody signs up for that study. So we have no randomized clinical trials for tobacco use, and yet we know from all the other studies, from all the other evidence, you shouldn't do this. It's clear, but there's no randomized clinical trials. So you could say, hey, wellness programs have very few randomized clinical trials, and it's true. Therefore, wellness programs don't do anything. That's the same logic applied to the tobacco industry. We have no randomized clinical trials. We also have no randomized clinical trials on the effectiveness of seatbelts, because nobody wants to be assigned to the don't wear your seatbelt group, the control group, and let's see what happens. So we don't have the study, and yet you all know, and there is lots of evidence, and it seems pretty clear that wearing seatbelts saves lives, even though there's no randomized clinical trials proving such. So this randomized clinical trial is a great way for critics to hide behind the science and say, wellness programs suck, you don't have any proof, you don't have any wellness, you don't have any clinical trials. Yeah, well, the same is true for tobacco, the same is true for seatbelts, and the same is true for whether or not organic foods are better than non-organic foods. There are no randomized clinical trials about the health benefits of organic foods, and yet it makes inherent sense that it would be better to eat foods that haven't been sprayed with herbicides and insecticides. So there's a limitation as to what you can hide behind when you use this information. So at the end of the day, companies, work sites, employers, they don't like to be randomized. We'd like you to do a big study. Dr. Aldan is here, and he wants to study the impact of your wellness program. In order to do a really good study, we need to randomly assign half of you to do nothing for the next 4 years. Nobody wants to sign up for that study. Not that it can't be done, it's just really hard. It's hard in the real world. It's easy with rats in a lab, but it's hard with real companies who are doing stuff and making it work. So we talk about wellness as one of those areas in businesses where we hold them to a very high standard. Wellness programs need to have lots of studies, and those studies have weaknesses, and there needs to be lots of clinical trials, and we need to really prove that wellness programs really change. We need to show all kinds of science behind that. And yet, I challenge you to think of any core business strategy that your company or worksite uses. Anything such as your marketing program, or your advertising budget, or product development, or maybe a new safety program. Maybe your own healthcare benefit and retirement benefits, whether or not your company has any financial consultants helping them guide you through retirement or budgeting, travel budgets. Name a single business strategy with more science behind it than wellness. I challenge anybody on our webinar today to give me any segment of any business that has more science behind it than wellness. Granted, we don't have thousands of randomized clinical trials, but we have thousands of other studies, just like the tobacco industry, just like the seatbelt science. We got lots and lots and lots of studies. What's curious to me is everybody comes out of the woodwork and everybody's up in arms about the ROI of wellness. But what's the ROI of your travel budget? What's the ROI of your healthcare plan? Did you ever think about your company offers a health insurance benefit? There's a huge cost to a company. Well, what's the return on that investment? What if you didn't offer a health insurance plan? What if you pushed everybody over into the exchanges and said, you're on your own, go find your own stuff? What would that do to the success or failure of your company? There's no studies looking at that. And yet we believe somehow that it's the right thing to do, and we do it. All I'm saying is, if you really want to be fair, you really want to get critical about wellness, and you really want to get all excited about the ROI of wellness, what about the ROI for everything else your company is doing? And for reasons I don't fully understand, wellness is held to a higher standard. For some reason, the critics say wellness is the one that has to really prove its value. Well, what about everything else? Why are we singled out? I'm not worried about it because the data is very compelling to support it. Let's just take a look at healthcare costs and how that works and how we can do an analysis. There are two real simple ways. Well, one simple way to take a look at the impact of wellness on your healthcare costs. One is just to evaluate the trends. What's happening with our healthcare spend across time? How does that compare to the rest of the companies that are carrier insurers? How does that compare to the region? How does that compare to other industries, other companies in our industry? How does that compare to the national averages? So you can do trend comparison. It's very simple. Any broker or any consultant worth their money can give you the data, and you can do some trend comparisons. That doesn't prove anything about your wellness program, but it does show that your costs are high or lower or equal to everybody else. Then there's another level of study to look at healthcare costs, and so these actuarial studies. This is the ROI studies that are there. Companies that embark on these studies need to be aware that you need to be careful what you're asking for. Dr. Aldana, we'd like you to help us analyze our healthcare costs from association with participation in our wellness program. Well, I can do that. We can look at every dollar that's been ever spent on every claim and every dollar ever spent on wellness. But you must be aware before we start that you may not like what we find. It's possible that your wellness program is associated with no change in cost. It's possible that your wellness program actually cost more in healthcare costs than when you didn't have a program. Hopefully, you'd like to say that your healthcare costs have gone down, but until you look at the study, the data are what the data are. A lot of weird things can happen, and I have seen every one of these three scenarios. I've seen it where healthcare costs go up. I've seen it where healthcare costs go down. I've seen it where healthcare costs show no change associated with wellness. Are you prepared to live under any one of those three scenarios? So let's just do a couple of examples. Here's a company, and this has been their healthcare trend spend per employee per year for about a 5-year period. And right about here is where your wellness program begins. So now we've got several years of good trend data. We kind of know where our costs are. And you look at your costs, and this is what happened after the wellness program began. Now here's where things get really interesting. If you look at that data and say, all right, well, before the wellness program began, the trend looked like that. That was kind of the trend. I mean, we can just see, if you were to guess in 2004 kind of where it was going to go, you'd be pretty accurate to say it's probably going to stay on that same trend. And yet it didn't, it deviated. And so the question then becomes, well, why? What made this cost take a different trajectory? Could it be the wellness program? Definitely. Could it be something else? Yes. In fact, there's a variety of reasons to explain that. Now, about this point in time, most people I talk to, their eyes start to glaze over and they start to get a little sleepy and they think, hey, that's great. And what they're really saying to me is, I really don't care. As long as my trend is good, I'm happy. And I don't want to dig in and find out why. But that's what we do in the science. We dig in and we try to find out why. What's caused that bend in the trend? Is it really wellness or is it something else? And this is where the waters get kind of muddy. So what we're trying to find out is, how confident are you that that new trend line, that new bend in the trend is due to your wellness program and something else? This is about confidence. This is a 50-50 chance when you flip the coin. How confident are you that you're going to get a heads or a tails? Well, you don't really know. So what caused the change in this plan design? What caused the change in this healthcare cost? This is getting to the core. Is my wellness program a wise investment? What evidence do we have? Well, it's possible that the wellness program caused the change in claims experience. In theory, people improve behaviors, they lower their health risks, they have fewer chronic diseases, they have lower utilization. That would explain that. But there are other things that could explain that as well. There are these high-cost cases, an employee who has a catastrophic injury or catastrophic illness, and we call these outliers, but they're exceptionally high-cost cases. To give you an example, here's the distribution of healthcare cost claims. Most people on the bottom down here, most people on this bottom line, most people, 24, 25, 23% of the population, they don't have any claims. I didn't go to the doctor once last year. A lot of people spend less than 500 to 1,000. This is per year. But there's this group up here at the very top that has way high expenses. This group of 3 or 4 or 5 people or percentage who have costs that are really high. Well, that's important. We call these the outliers. Some people call them the Pareto group, from the Italian mathematician. But this group can influence what happens. In the NBA, the National Basketball Association, the average salary for the players is $3.8 million. The median salary, that's the salary that's in the middle, the 50th percentile, is $2 million. And the reason there's a difference between the average and the median is because Kobe Bryant makes $30 million. He tilts the data towards the other end, which draws the average really high. Kobe, in this case, would be an outlier. He's ruining the trend for everybody else. By his very presence, it changes the average. So if you have this data set and your wellness program began, and all of a sudden you had fewer high-cost cases, you would end up with a trajectory that looks like that. It wasn't the wellness program. It was just dumb luck that you had fewer high-cost cases in your group, which makes it look like this. That's a possible explanation. But one way to do that is to analyze the data with and without high-cost cases. There are other reasons to explain why your program, why your trend is so good. Maybe you changed your plan design. Remember, if you change your deductibles, higher deductibles, people go to the doctor less. Higher copays, people go to the doctor less. High deductible plans, these CDHPs, people go to the doctor a lot less. In fact, the average is about an 18% reduction in costs associated with high deductible plans. That could explain it. A change in your workforce. Maybe you have a younger workforce than when you had in the beginning, because younger people don't go to the doctor as much as older people. Women go to the doctor more often than men. So maybe you have more men in the workforce. Maybe there are other things called historical effects. Like maybe there's something going on in your neighborhood or around your company that's caused people to be more aware of their health. Maybe there's a really good big push on the Biggest Loser program on TV and everybody's excited and they're all losing weight. That would be something going on outside of your workforce, like the Affordable Care Act, or maybe there were layoffs. Maybe you changed your third-party administrator for your company, or maybe you became self-funded. Maybe you have fewer employees and your total spend is obviously less. Maybe you don't have as many smokers as you once had at one time. And maybe there's this thing called regression to the mean, which basically says high scores tend to migrate down naturally, and low scores tend to migrate up. They tend to move towards the middle naturally. It's called, they regress to the mean. Somebody with a really, really high blood pressure, given enough time, that person's blood pressure is probably going to come down a little bit. Somebody with a really, really low blood pressure tends to kind of creep up a little bit. It regresses to the mean. That can explain part of this. So here's this situation again. I want to know why those costs are flat. And I want to know if it's the wellness program. So if you look at the entire workforce, everybody at this company, here's all the employees. The reason why the costs are flat is diluted in this group because you have some people who participated, some who didn't. It's a bit of a mess. You'd like to know if it was your wellness program, but you also know that not everybody participated in your wellness program. So one way we do this is we split the group out. So now, if it's the wellness program, let's find the people who were in the wellness program. And let's make a group. I know it's self-selection, but people self-select to be participants. And then there's a group that says, to heck with your wellness fluff, I'm not doing that. Okay, now let's evaluate these two groups independently to see if there's a difference. Because if there's a difference here, chances are pretty good it's more likely due to your wellness program. And this is what we did at Salt Lake County. They're self-funded, had about 3,700 employees. They started the wellness program. They have good incentive plan. The red line is the wellness program participants. The blue line is the non-participants during the time period in which we studied them. So the non-participants have a higher trend than the participants. We were able to separate them out. We look at them together, there's a difference there. In fact, when we look carefully at what that difference looks like, the gap between the two could be due to the wellness program. It could also be to some other factor we didn't measure. It could be to the fact that before the program even began, maybe the non-participants had higher claims. I know this, wellness program non-participants don't always have higher health risks, higher claims, or poor behaviors. Sometimes they're really healthy people and they just don't have time for the wellness program. In this particular study, the wellness program participants had elevated health risks higher than the non-participants. So maybe there's a difference in their BMI or other health risks, or maybe there's some other factor we didn't even measure. You never really fully know unless you do a randomized clinical trial, and we can't do a randomized clinical trial. But if I were to bet, just the fact that we were able to sort these two groups out and look carefully, we know that this individual company spent $1.4 million on their program over a 3-year period. They saved 4.8. That's an ROI of 3.3. And the best explanation for that difference is the effort they put into their wellness program. Now, this is one published paper we did 4 years ago, looking at a real answer to this problem. But then there's a lot of fiction out there, a lot of fiction. So I was asked, and colleagues were asked, to evaluate the claims of another worksite. This is a company that had been doing health coaching and just health coaching. And they got some data and they brought the data in and we took a really good look at it. And what we found was that it really didn't make any difference if they were getting health coaching or not. Plus, there was not very many people in the study, and the fewer the number of people, the harder it is to be confident in your findings. So we said, we looked at it, there's nothing here. There's no effect. Well, it didn't take much longer, but the individual who asked for this information went ahead and published a couple of articles, did some blogs, it showed up in Forbes, it showed up in Health Affairs, and they started to present these graphs. Look, here's what happened to total claims for program participants and non-participants. The yellow line was participants, the black line was non-participants. In 1 year period, the trend is totally different. Their claims were lower. Their inpatient hospital claims were lower, while the non-participants were going to the hospital a lot. And the outpatient claims were really high for non-participants. And then the emergency room visits were flat for participants, but really high for non-participants. So I see this data. It shows up on the web. It shows up in their marketing material. Having seen the original data set, I know for a fact that this is just a bunch of hogwash because I saw the data. There was nothing that could be published from the data because it found no difference whatsoever. And yet later, you can go ahead and spin this, make your marketing materials, you can promote this, and like every other industry, the wellness industry has its share of shady characters. Find me an industry that does not. Banking, lawyers, whatever, accountant firms, there's always some snake oil salesmen, there's always some shady characters in every industry. It's the nature of humanity. The reason that this information is not viable, it was never been verified. We looked at it, it wasn't publishable, it never got published. So they then took it and spun it into something else. That's why the science would eliminate these kinds of results because there's no peer review, there's no oversight into what's going on. Well, how do you know the difference? How do you tell what's legitimate? It's not always easy, but if it's been verified, if it's been published, that's a pretty good indicator. It's at least pointing in the right direction. If it sounds too good to be true, you're probably right. Your gut tells you it's probably too good to be true, unless it's backed up with some good science. I said earlier, the science is large and compelling for wellness. It doesn't have a plethora of randomized clinical trials. But on the whole, there's some facts that we can learn from this data set. ROI studies are almost predominantly done on larger companies. And the reason is because larger companies give us enough statistical power to eliminate chance as being an explanation. So we have to use large groups. You can't do it with smaller groups. That's why all of the studies that have been published are published on larger groups. All of them, with a couple of exceptions, have been fully self-insured. In other words, they're taking care of their own claims and they save any money they don't spend. That's important. There's very few randomized clinical trials, and every one of these studies has weaknesses, as does every study ever published on anything on planet Earth. They have weaknesses. On average, every dollar that companies spend on wellness, they save 3.4 on healthcare costs. On average, every dollar companies spend on wellness programs, they saved 5.8 based on the studies that have looked at absenteeism. So the big question now that I want to ask is a much more global question. If wellness programs impact a variety of factors within an organization, wouldn't that impact show up in other ways? Not just healthcare costs, maybe not just absenteeism, but maybe morale impacts productivity, and productivity impacts customer support, and customer support impacts sales and client retention. Maybe as a company says, we care about you as individuals. A company says to its people, you, individual people, you people are our most valuable asset, and we're going to do whatever it takes to keep good track of you, to take care of you. Which brings me to another analysis I want to share with you that none of you have seen yet. Does it really impact the bottom line? In other words, does wellness bring value to an organization? Does it make a meaningful difference within a larger organization? I use the term population health management to describe this, but my question is, can it impact the larger financial long-term success of an organization? Now, the critics on the phone today are going to freak out when I show you this information. But this is a sneak peek, a very short sneak peek of a study that was offered to be done for the COOP board. C. Everett Koop was our former Surgeon General. With his blessing, we created the Health Project, which identifies the best wellness companies in the U.S. And we award them the COOP Award. These are the best of the best. And the board of directors, I've been on the board for about 10 years now, we carefully review all the applicants and find really the best ones. Well, the study that was just recently done, and again, this is extremely preliminary, the manuscript isn't even written yet, but I have seen the results, said, what if, here's the winners of the COOP Award by year that are publicly traded companies. What if these companies do wellness in such a way that really impacts their companies in a large strategic profit way? For example, in 1999, there were 4 companies who won the COOP Award. What if you bought stock in those 4 companies the month they got the award, October 1999? You had a portfolio, $10,000, and with that $10,000 in 1999, you split it up among 4 companies on the bottom that got the COOP Award. A year later, the new COOP awardees for 2000 were identified. You diluted your portfolio. You only could start with 10,000, so you sold some of the shares of it so you could buy shares of the newest members of the awardee group. And every year in October, you added the new companies that got the award into your little portfolio. And what if you compared that portfolio to one that bought just the S&P 500 at the same time and held it? This is a portfolio of COOP awardees across time. What happens? Well, the black line in the top is the S&P 500. The orange line is if you bought only companies who win the COOP along the way. And the green line is the difference in performance across those two. So across this 15-year period, only buying COOP awardees in the month that they got the award and holding them, S&P 500 did 105% across this time. The COOP winners did 350% over the same time period. And holy cow, I can hear the critics screaming on the phone as we speak. Whoa, you're freaking me out. You can't just buy these companies willy-nilly. There's no evidence that wellness caused this. You know, there's $54 trillion invested in securities, and there's not a single randomized clinical trial behind any of it. In fact, there's not a study behind any of it. So whatever your portfolio is or whatever your retirement account is, you're buying stocks on somebody's suggestion that you're going to, well, here's a suggestion. These companies really care about their employees. These companies have aggressive population health management programs in place. And I agree, it's a financial analysis after the fact, and like they always say, past performance doesn't guarantee future performance, and all the warnings are there, and I get all that. But this is a very rudimentary look at what happens to companies who really care about their people. Now, you can read into this what you want, and the critics are going to go ballistic over this. But my point is, most people are making financial decisions with mutual funds and stocks on way less information than this. So for what it's worth, that paper will be coming out in the next year, and you can read all the nitty-gritty about it, but it's put together by the COOP board, and I'm on that board. I think it's some interesting stuff. Well, here's another one. This one literally has been completed this week. And in a quick review, this is Boise School District. They have 3,100 employees. They've been a WellSteps client for 4 years now. We now have all their data. We have 6 years of claims data, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of claims. We have their personal health assessment data. We have their biometric screening data. We have their employee eligibility data, their wellness program participation data. And what we do is we then get legal permission. We get HIPAA compliance checked off. We do decryption. We clean the data. We get the outliers looked at. We do merging. We range check to make sure there's no garbage in the data. We do about 6,000 lines of code in SAS to pull the data sets together to really make sure we're looking at the right things. Then we have to define participation. What does it mean to participate? Is that a health risk appraisal? is that biometric screening, health risk appraisal, and 6 of 12 campaigns from WellSteps. How do you define participation? In this particular case, every year they decided if you did certain things, you qualified for the wellness plan, health insurance plan, which had lower copays, lower deductibles, and lower premiums. That's the incentive if you were able to complete them. If you didn't do those certain things and you don't qualify, you get the standard insurance plan, which is not nearly as good. We create groups, participants, non-participants. We adjust the claims for inflation. We set the study parameters. We control for different confounders like differences in age and sex and baseline differences between the groups. And then we calculate the ROI for what this group has really done with their costs. So here's a link on the bottom of this page. This is the Kaiser Family Foundation Premiums and Worker Contributions Survey, goes out every year. For the Western United States, where this school is, this is what the actual Western-wide, any company above 3,000 employees, this is their actual total spend for employees per year across time. This is the expected healthcare costs for similar groups. If Boise School District, this school district, had followed the trend, then they would have matched up pretty much likely just like that. That would what we would expect Boise to do. Remember, trend analysis. And yet, here is where WellSteps kicked in, and here is what happened to their trend. That's what we expected. The blue line is what actually happened. There's a dramatic decline. Now, this is pretty amazing. This school district pays less for healthcare costs now than they did 6 years ago. Way over here in 2009, they were paying more than they're paying right now. This is a zero trend. This is actually a trend that's down. Yeah, it was looking pretty nasty. WellSteps kicks in. We get a big deviation from this, and we compare participants to non-participants. 3 years before the program began, the participants and non-participants had almost identical claims. Once the program begins and we go across time, there is a divergence. Program non-participants cost considerably more than participants. We're able to quantify that, and we know that that savings is $5,025,000 over a 3-year period. Then we look at all what they spent. Well, how much money did they have to spend in their wellness program to get this savings? Well, they spent $1,050,000 over the 3-year period. That includes incentives and salaries and WellSteps and a lot of stuff they're doing. They do a lot of biometric screening, and sometimes they let physicians do it, which is a pretty pricey way to go, but that's what people wanted. They saved $5 million. They spent $1 million. We can do an ROI, a benefit to cost ratio. It's pretty simple. It's a benefit cost ratio of 4.0. We know that they saved about $4 million after expenses from doing this. This paper is in preparation. It'll be sent out to publish probably later in the summer and the fall. But it's amazing what this has been able to show. And you could say, well, what about outliers? We controlled for outliers. We actually eliminated them. They have a stop loss program. Any cost above $250,000 is paid for by their carrier, not the school district. What about regression to the mean? We've looked at that. What about selection bias? Well, it just so happens that non-participants had lower health risks than participants. So we try to look at all of these possible factors and eliminate them. So that at the end of the day, this is an organization that works on taxpayer dollars that spent $1 million to do wellness over a 3-year period, and they have a zero trend over the last years that they've been doing this. That's taxpayer dollars that have been saved, and this is tough because school districts are really struggling to do this. Well, the new WellSteps website, you'll remember, WellSteps, we have the tools, we have the ROI calculator. We have the ROI calculator, which we have used in the past to estimate what the cost savings would be. So here's what I put in. I put in the Boise School District data in 2011. They had had 9% increases up to that point, and here's their employees. And here's the calculation. When we do this calculation, we can actually see, here's their trend. If they had done nothing, here's what we anticipated they did. It just so happens that we anticipated that they would save about $3 million from the ROI calculator, an estimate. What really happened with this group is they actually saved $5 million. So the ROI calculator was too conservative in this particular case. The ROI calculator estimated a savings of 2.5 million. They actually saved double that. So the calculator has got some good validation behind it. All right. There's a lot of other studies to back this up. A lot of other studies on changes in behavior, changes in health risks. And now we have studies that have looked at savings in health behaviors. But let me show you one little item here. This guy is not him, but our programmer. We gave him a gift card out of the blue to say, hey, thanks for all your hard work. He called me later and said, I've been programming most of my life. You're the first company to ever send me a gift card saying, hey, we appreciate that. We thank you. He was almost in tears because he appreciated that savings. That little recognition meant a big deal. We pretty much purchased his loyalty for the price of a gift card. Wellness programs can do these things, but they also improve employee morale. And that's a big deal. It's a very big deal to improve morale. There are reasons why employees stick around. It's because they feel wanted, they provide better service, and wellness programs do this. I'm going to skip to this. Let your employees know they're appreciated. Give them responsibilities. Make sure management knows about them and is listening to them. Wellness shows that you care, and wellness programs have an impact. This is especially true when they feel like they're wanted. So back to the critics. The critics are howling. They're all freaked out because of wellness programs this and wellness programs that. Quotes, workplace wellness produces no savings. That's a quote from the critics. Wellness programs are a complete waste of money. That's more from the critics. You've seen 90% of programs are terrible. They're counterproductive. They're worse. If you use what the critics are saying and you really believe it, then what it says is every single CFO and every single CEO in every major corporation in the United States, and now most leaders in most mid-sized companies, are idiots. Because the critics say these programs are a waste of time and money, and yet the most powerful, influential business people on the planet know that wellness brings value to them. Either the critics are correct, and every CEO and CFO is stupid. That's what this really means if you listen to the critics. And yet, wellness is here to stay. There's more and more companies doing it now than ever. And common sense prevails. No clinical trials, and yet we know tobacco, smoking, seatbelts, healthy eating is important. It's important because it changes people's lives. Wellness programs are the future. They're here to stay. There's plenty of evidence to back these up. They're very powerful tools. In summary, the science is never going to be perfect. Accept it. Good wellness programs become core business strategies because they provide value. Employers and employees see the benefits. They feel the benefits. Good wellness programs provide substantial returns. And lastly, worksite wellness programs are doing more to improve public health than anything else in America today, despite what the critics might say. Troy, I didn't leave much for questions. I know we got a lot. That's where we are.
Thank you, Steve. I think that collectively I heard the air suck out of the room. So you're right. There have not been many questions, but I think everyone's just kind of blown away by everything that you've shared today. But I have a couple of questions, and we don't have much time, maybe 5 minutes. So can you, we said in the marketing materials we would talk a little bit about value on investment. You did talk about value on investment, but you didn't label it as such. Could you just sort of go back and summarize what we know about VOI?
Let me show you this. This summarizes this. This is what I call the market realities. WellSteps has a performance guarantee. Year 1, we guarantee participation to exceed 50%. Year 2, we guarantee reductions in elevated health risks or improvements in health behaviors. And year 3, we're going to document a cost savings of 150% of the cost in return. What we find in reality is people love year 1 results. They like the year 2 results. To date, we've never had a single company say, hey, we want you to do the ROI for us and tell us if we're getting 150% of the cost. They don't ask, which makes me think The ROI might be the reason why they start, but once they get in and once they hear Polly down in accounting say how much her life has changed, once they see the enrollment and the engagement and the participation and the change in the culture, there is an inherent value associated with this program that exceeds whatever their original concerns were about the cost. It's as if this ROI discussion becomes a value on investment discussion, and the value exceeds their need to have an ROI discussion. Nobody asks for this. Boise never asked for their ROI discussion on their claims. We did it because we wanted to provide the science and validate what we're doing. This tells me that at the beginning it might be about ROI, but once they see the value, once they see what's happening within an organization, the discussion switches.
Okay, you have a lot of people who are standing up and applauding, who are saying, great job. They absolutely love this webinar, Steve, so thank you for all your preparation. Here's a great question that we'll have a quick answer by Kate. She wants to know, what's the average spend on employee wellness?
The average is around $150, but for this group that we evaluated at Boise, it's right here. Boise spent $112 per employee per year, and they have a very aggressive incentive program. $112 per employee year is what Boise spent. That's way below the $150 we often hear quoted.
Graydon Yohe, which is a name you may recognize from Oklahoma
Hi,
State.
Graydon.
Hey, Graydon, how you doing? Good to hear you. He wants to know what the N was in the Salt Lake County data.
About 3,700. 3,700 people in Salt Lake. The Boise data has 3,108.
Okay, here's another question about work sites are fond of biometric screening. Matt, I'm summarizing the question that you asked earlier. Work sites are fond of biometric screening every year. Does this practice, in your opinion, lead to over-treating because of over-screening versus simply using the United States Preventive Services Task Force screening guidelines?
We have worked with the school district and all of our clients to encourage them to not screen every year. It's a big cost, and the return diminishes dramatically after the very first screening. So we highly, highly, highly encourage groups to follow the Preventive Services Task Force. Screen when necessary. Screening every year is a complete and total disregard for what the science says. That said, Boise has opted to do it every year because the employees love it. The employees want to know, I'm working hard, I'm doing this, I want to get it screened again. So they have opted to pay the money to do it every year. Now they may eventually back off, I hope they do, but they kept doing it because the resounding employee interest in continuing to do this every year, which tells me they're still engaged, they're still concerned about their health, they want to know. We do what our clients want. We encourage them to do otherwise, but that's the situation. I would highly discourage groups from doing that, but in this case, they're listening to their employers, the employees, and the employees want to keep doing it. So it is what it is.
There's just more questions than we can handle here. Here's a question here about in-person versus phone coaching. Comment, please. If it's okay, Steve, I'm going to take this. This may be one of the webinars we do in the next couple of months. Refresh on coaching. I don't know that there's really any good data on in-person versus phone coaching. Your comment quickly?
Not on the ROI. The ROI is a tough one with coaching. If you consider that coaching is one component of a much larger wellness effort, most of the studies have looked at the larger wellness effort, and it's impossible to tease out what effect might be just from the coaching. If it's a piece of a larger pie, analyze the whole pie. But the ROI for just the coaching piece is very elusive.
We've got time for one or two more questions. Actually, three. I want to ask all three of them. Well, we'll go one at a time. But here goes the question. Critics have criticized publicly the WellSteps ROI calculator. Can you let us know why and why they shouldn't criticize the ROI calculator? I'm in the wellness field, like the ROI calculator. She's not questioning the value, just trying to understand what are the issues from the critics and how you would respond.
Oh, that's interesting. You know, when we first did this, people would put in different values like this. Now we have a warning that pops up that says, oh, by the way, and excuse my French, if you put crap into the calculator, you get crap out. garbage in, garbage out. So the critics who have blasted this said that their trends were negative 15 for 12 years, or that their cost for healthcare was like $1,200 per employee per year. So what we've done is we've now put in here parameters that say you've got to put realistic data in here. They put crap in, they got crap out, they took pictures and go, oh, look, it's busted. These guys don't know what they're doing. So I won't quote my father, but he uses BS a lot. And this is pure, unadulterated BS. And yeah, I'm a little ticked off about it because they've taken it and run like crazy, and it's just crap. It's garbage in and garbage out. So we've had to put parameters on here so people don't act like idiots anymore.
Okay, I have time for one last question. Be careful how you answer this one. Uh, what is the agenda of the wellness critics? I'm not making these up. These are real questions.
I'm telling you right now, Troy, you've stumped me on that one. What's the agenda? There's Anton Ego right there, and I can't tell you what it is, other than I'm be honest. I'm going to be perfectly honest and blunt. It's somewhere between psychosis and neuroticism. I don't get it. It's not constructive criticism. It's just throwing rocks. Great, tell me what to do differently. Well, I'm not going to tell you differently. I'm just going to tell you what you've done sucks. Great, do some research. Well, they don't do research. So it's a great way to get in the media. It's a great way to stir up the fight. It's a great way to fight with people and battle. And I've got other things I haven't shared with you, but some of the critics have done horrible things to the point of extortion, sending letters to deans and colleges around. It's crap. I don't want to end with that. All I know is Boise School District is ecstatic about what's happening with wellness.
Let's the webinar is scheduled to end about 2 minutes ago. Let's just stay on for another 3 to 5 minutes because there's just way more questions we can handle. But there are some fantastic questions, so we will excuse those of you who want to go. We're going to end the webinar at 8 after the hour precisely. Hard stop. But see, there's just a few more questions here. Here's one from Pedro who wants to know if other countries don't have healthcare costs to worry about. How did we do ROI analyses on wellness in countries that have public health provided for them?
You just have to do ROI on everything else on this circle right here, except healthcare costs. You still have presenteeism, absenteeism. You can measure those. You still have disability. You can still measure morale. You can do retention. Everything on that circle except medical costs is an issue to employers outside the U.S.
Question about the Boise School District data. This is a question from Lori. She wants to know, in the Boise School District example, you said the district pays less for healthcare now than they did 6 years ago. Was there a change in health plan that could have accounted for that? She wants to know.
That's a great question, and the answer is no. There is no change in the health plan. What really shocks me is that the non-participants, these people up here who have the highest costs, if you don't participate, your premium is higher, your copay is higher, your deductible is higher, which you would think would drive medical care costs down, but it didn't. Remember, the people in red here are the non-participants, and they're paying more for health care across the board, and their costs are still higher.
There's many questions about outcomes-based programs, and this person is responding to the statement you made about biometric screening, and they said, well, what about outcomes-based programs? How do we work biometric screening into that? So maybe you could just comment on that quickly.
Just make sure that you're not being punitive and that you care about people and that your employees know you care. If you come in and say your cholesterol and your blood pressure has to be in this range or it's going to cost you, you're in trouble. Give them a cafeteria, give them a menu option. You can do tobacco, you can do cholesterol, you can do blood pressure, you can do program participation. You can do a variety of things to allow them to kind of pick and choose what they want to do. Just say, we want to encourage you to be long-term, healthy employees here. You pick the way you want to decide if you qualify or not. But if you come in and say, if you smoke and you say you don't smoke, we're going to test your spit with a swab and measure for cotinine, and we're going to find the liars among you. That sends a message that you don't want to send. So you can do outcomes, but you have to do it with love, not with a hammer.
Yeah, there is a broker, Rich Allen, who we work with at Lockton in Dallas, Texas. He calls that malicious compliance. It's a term I absolutely love.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do it with benevolence, not maliciousness.
hmm I think we'll ask one last question, and we'll let this be. By the way, Valerie, thank you, Valeria, for answering the question that Steve just answered. She just commented her answer. She answered one of the questions that you were asked earlier. This is a question directly from Matt. Critics also crow about selection bias and motivated participants skewing our data. Can you address this?
Yeah, if you look at and compare the two groups, remember here's the participants, here's the non-participants. Red is non-participants. Their healthcare costs are about the same. For 3 years before the program ever began, they're about the same. Then we dig in and say, what's the difference in BMI between the groups? How many males and females in each group? What's the difference in cholesterol? Who's physically active? Who's not? We compare these two groups at baseline to see if there's any differences. It's almost not always a perfect match, but from this point on, what's the difference between the two groups? It's mostly wellness program participation. After we look at and we control for statistical differences here, at this point on, all things are almost perfectly equal. That gives credence to the fact that it's the wellness program that's causing these differences. So yeah, we try to control for differences at baseline. We can do that statistically in a variety of ways. These, by the way, have been controlled for age and gender. So the number of males and females in each group is the same. We've already adjusted for that. So we try to address selection bias issues with statistical control for any differences along the way. And that's way more information than you wanted to hear.
I think with that, there are many people again who've expressed gratitude, who've chimed in and said, "Thank you, Steve." I will echo all of those comments. I apologize to those of you who asked fantastic questions. We just don't have time to get to all of them today. We'd like to give you the month of July off. We will not be doing a Well Steps webinar in July. However, we will be resuming in August. We will be announcing that webinar topic as a time approaches. Watch your email for that. On behalf of everybody at Well Steps, we'd like to say thank you. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you in a couple months. Thanks, everyone.